Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi with Retail Insider. Joining me today is Dan Berezan, who is founder of CultivatR in Calgary. Thanks for joining us today, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Mario. Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's talk a little bit about CultivatR, what it is and what you guys do.
Yeah, so the easiest way we like to say is we're an online farmers market. So basically, we work with about 100 now local farmers, food artisans, and ranchers to get their products to consumers.
Okay, and how do you get the products to consumers? In what ways?
Yeah, it's a direct-to-consumer model. So basically, you go online, our customers go online, place orders, and then we get it from our producers, and then we deliver it to customers. What's kind of cool about what we're doing is, I think we're one of the first sort of grocery stores, if you will, who actually run on a just-in-time inventory basis. So we don't actually stock any product. It all is literally to order, picked, delivered, all within 2 days. We've just expanded to 2-day delivery. So.
Yeah, and could you tell me a little bit about the history and how this came about and the idea for doing this came about?
Yeah, it actually started. My wife and I were semi-retired out of oil and gas, and we moved out to the country hoping to fish more and fly fish more. And we got a chance to really meet our neighbors who were farmers and ranchers, and heard that they weren't making any money selling their food. And so we thought there was something wrong with that, and so we did a deep dive into it, and hence CultivatR kind of evolved.
Mm-hmm. And what's your feel about consumers these days? And for a couple of things, for fresh stuff, fresh food and produce, and then B, for shopping local.
I think there's two things on it. One, I think, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, people jumped all over it. Like we had our crazy growth years in the middle of the pandemic and stuff. And so we've seen some people start to head back away. But one of the things that's been really interesting with us is that, everyone else's food price, like we've all heard how food prices are going through the roof and how expensive they are. But with us, for the most part, because of the nature of our model, we actually haven't raised prices. And, we actually did a comparison the other day. And I think local, if you're buying something local, it's always come with the stigma that it's going to be more expensive. However, we did some price comps the other day, and we're actually cheaper than any other grocery delivery service in town. And so it's quite amazing to think that, we compete dollar for dollar with the Loblaws and the big giant companies out there.
Uh-huh. And consumers really like this idea, don't they?
They do. Yeah, like we've got 75% of the customers who we acquire stay with us and continue to shop with us. So we've been very lucky.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about, I guess, the growth that you experienced and through the pandemic?
Yeah, well, it was literally overnight. We had just launched the company in January 2020,
Yeah.
pretty much right before, and sort of that, launching it. How are we going to pay the rent this month? To all of a sudden, it's like, oh geez, we need 10 staff members, and we had to actually move warehouses in the middle. Like we literally just signed a lease, and 6 months later, we were having to double our size capacity, and it was quite interesting. I literally had to sleep in my trailer in the back of a warehouse behind our warehouse for the first 3 months, and so it was pretty insane, but we stabilized it, and it's stayed pretty consistent, and we're pretty happy about that.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about your reach now? Like how far do you go out in terms of delivery of product to people?
Yeah, well, we're anywhere within sort of the Calgary region. So we obviously do the suburbs like Cochrane, and I don't know if I should call them suburbs, but the different elements of Calgary. So like Cochrane, Airdrie, Okotoks. Just started doing High River. We've actually found a lot of customers there. Our goal is to actually grow as well across the country. We're hoping to raise some money to be able to do that, and but again, keeping the idea of a local vendors everywhere we go. So we're eyeing, probably looking at Edmonton, where we'll probably be looking at, BC as well, and so kind of building out Western Canada.
Oh, okay, cool. And what are your plans and your strategy in terms of raising that money? What are you looking at doing?
Couple different options. We're open to it. Obviously, we're seeking investors. We've talking to some venture capital firms, as well as, it's like any business, the balance of equity and debt that we're kind of looking at to do it. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. So it's we don't have a clear cut answer on what it's going to be, but we also are looking at some partnerships with some larger players as well.
Okay, so you mentioned that you folks were in part of the oil patch for a while there. What did you do in the oil patch?
I was in corporate finance, and my wife's an environmental scientist. So kind of interesting that, we kind of went and looked at farming from both how we can make the system better from both an environmental perspective and an economical perspective. And it was kind of cool, like what we found by doing the model that we do and using the technology we've built, that which we call predictive ag, that it's actually really cool, because what's good for the environment actually becomes economically beneficial for the farmer and producer and consumer as well. So what's good for the environment actually ends up being good for everyone.
Yeah. And where did, like, how this idea come about? Like what, like, I know you mentioned your farming friends and neighbors, but I'm just curious, just out of the blue that this came about. And
Yeah, kind of, sort of, but not really. So the idea of it sort of started is hearing someone, and literally it was over wings and beer one night.
wow.
My wife is like, we had a outdoor clothing company that we exited, and sort of like, and this was just when sort of online shopping was just sort of taking off, which is sort of funny to think it wasn't even that long ago,
Yeah.
but less than 10 years ago. And we had an online clothing company, and my wife and I were sitting having wings and beer, and she was like, you know we should sell that stuff online. Like, I think we should look at doing that. And so that's what started it. But then as we explored that part of the business, it was, well, it basically came this problem of suppliers always having to guess what they needed to produce. And that was always a problem we saw, is how can we grow this? Like, if you look at like a Loblaws or a Superstore, or even the Calgary Co-op,
Yeah.
how complex that structure is, how getting all that food and how many people they feed, and like how many farms that involves and all that stuff. And it's hard for a farmer to be able to say, they all want to do things differently, but it's hard for them to be able to say, okay, I'm going to completely change my operation and take on all that risk to see what might happen. And so that's where we sort of said, well, if we can start, as we deep dived into it, we saw this where the risk factors were. And so we basically built a model that how could we do this and minimize the risk for the producer, and minimize the risk even for us, and then ultimately the consumer. Because
Yeah.
what's interesting about food is, as you go in the system, it's all there. Like, we talk about food prices increase as well. A lot of that comes from waste. Most people don't realize that 35% of the food that's produced doesn't even make it to the consumer. And so that's part of your food cost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Dan, do you bring this stuff obviously to consumers, but also do you have places like restaurants that use you, or?
No, we're 100% direct to consumer.
Okay.
We've kind of built it in our model that we kind of take the approach, you can only do one thing well, and so we're going to stick with that. And and kind of just basically, we have enough demand that it keeps our producers pretty busy. So to take on that other element is just something that we don't really have the capacity for right now. Would it be something we'd look at in the future? Maybe, but the consumer side of it is so big. There's until we're feeding everybody in Calgary and everybody in Western Canada, we're pretty focused on just the direct to consumer.
All right, super. Thanks, Dan, for joining us today.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
All right, that was Dan Berezan, who is founder of CultivatR based in Calgary. My name is Mario Toneguzzi. I'm with Retail Insider. Thanks for joining us today.